For lifetimes, the divine feminine has waited, patiently, painfully, lovingly. Waited for the masculine to awaken, to soften, to heal, to rise. She held space. She bore the weight. She nurtured, whispered, and endured. But the age of waiting is over. The divine feminine is no longer content to pause her power, her truth, or her evolution while the masculine catches up. This is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of remembrance, a return to sovereignty, a reclamation of sacred wholeness that does not depend on external permission or validation. This shift does not mean the feminine is abandoning the masculine, nor does it mean war between energies. It means the feminine within all of us, regardless of gender, is stepping forward, no longer confined by the outdated contracts of codependency, silence, or self-sacrifice. The era of waiting is dissolving. The era of embodiment has begun. She rises, not in spite of the masculine, but because it is simply time. And whether the masculine rises alongside her or not, she rises anyway. Reclaiming sovereignty, the divine feminine steps into her full power without permission. The divine feminine is done waiting. She is done waiting for the masculine to heal, to rise, to remember. Done waiting for broken systems to shift, for institutions to acknowledge her, for partners to catch up, for cultures to evolve. She is done asking for space, for respect, for permission. She no longer negotiates her worth. She no longer bargains her power away in exchange for breadcrumbs of validation. For lifetimes, the feminine was told to be patient, to hold the vision, to nurture, to mend, to soften, to dim her fire so others wouldn't be uncomfortable, to wait for safety, for recognition, for readiness. But the waiting has become a cage, and the cage has crumbled. This is not a rebellion. This is not revenge. This is remembrance. This is reclamation. This is the sovereign feminine, fully embodied, fully expressed, fully awake, rising not because someone finally said yes, but because she finally said yes to herself. This rising is not conditional. It does not depend on whether the masculine joins her, understands her, or even approves. She no longer sacrifices her truth on the altar of someone else's discomfort. The feminine within every being, every woman, every man, every soul, is remembering what was buried beneath centuries of suppression. She is the wildfire. She is the ocean. She is the storm, the seed, the soil, the cosmos. She is creation itself. Her power is not chaos, it is life. Her rage is not destruction, it is liberation. Her softness is not weakness, it is alchemy. And now she moves, fully, fiercely, freely, without waiting, without asking, without permission. This is the end of the waiting game. This is the reclamation of sacred sovereignty, and whether the world is ready or not, she rises. The collapse of codependency, redefining sacred union beyond waiting. The old story is crumbling, the story where the feminine waits for the masculine to heal, to choose her, to meet her in his fullness. The story where love is conditional upon someone else's readiness, someone else's growth, someone else's ability to rise. That story was never love. It was survival wrapped in the disguise of devotion. It was codependency masquerading as loyalty. It was self-abandonment dressed up as patience. The divine feminine is done carrying the weight of both. done mothering the masculine while starving herself, done pretending that holding the broken pieces together is sacred union. It is not. Real union is not built on waiting, not built on sacrificing one's own becoming in hopes that someone else will catch up. Real union is not a contract of exhaustion. It is a convergence of two sovereign beings, whole unto themselves, choosing to walk together without needing to complete one another. The collapse is here. The collapse of the belief that love means over-functioning, that partnership requires the feminine to shrink while the masculine finds his footing, that harmony is achieved by one half doing the healing for both. No more. The feminine no longer holds herself hostage to someone else's timeline. She no longer bargains with her own soul in exchange for love, presence, or commitment. She chooses herself, fully, fiercely, unapologetically, not against the masculine, but beside him, if he can meet her there. And if not, she walks anyway. She rises anyway. She creates anyway. Because her life, her purpose, and her power were never meant to be contingent on anyone's permission, readiness, or approval. This is the death of codependency. And from the ashes rises something truer, something freer, something that doesn't just look like sacred union, but is. Fierce grace. How the divine feminine leads the healing of the masculine without sacrificing herself. There is a grace that does not look like softness. It is not passive. It is not sweet. It does not whisper in comforting tones or offer itself endlessly to be consumed. It is the grace that burns, the grace that stands unwavering, the grace that says, I will hold you in love, but I will not save you. I will witness your becoming, but I will not betray myself to ease your discomfort. This is fierce grace, and it is how the divine feminine leads now. For too long, the feminine was conditioned to believe that love meant sacrifice, that to be spiritual, good, or devoted meant carrying the weight of others' healing on her back. She was taught to soothe the masculine's wounds, to hold space for his avoidance, to swallow her own truth so he wouldn't feel threatened by her fire. But grace without boundaries is martyrdom, and compassion without self-honouring is self-abandonment. The feminine has learned. The feminine remembers. She now understands that to truly support the healing of the masculine, whether within the world, within her relationships, or within herself, she must stand rooted in her own sovereignty. She no longer overfunctions. She no longer fixes. She no longer softens herself to make others comfortable. Instead, she embodies fierce grace. The grace that says, I will not collapse for you. I will not betray my knowing to protect your illusions. I will not mother you into manhood or bleed out to bandage wounds you refuse to tend yourself. Her love is not withdrawal. It is challenge. Her love is not absence. It is presence with a spine. Her love is not enabling. It is an invitation to rise. The divine feminine does not lead by shrinking. She leads by rising, not from anger, though rage may have been the doorway, not from bitterness, though grief may have been the teacher, but from the clarity that her wholeness is the medicine. When the feminine is fully embodied, in her truth, in her boundaries, in her unapologetic presence, she becomes a living mirror, a reflection so clear that the masculine can finally see where he has hidden from himself. But make no mistake, she does not stay in proximity to the masculine who chooses not to rise. She no longer waits at the gates of someone else's awakening. She no longer sacrifices her joy, her peace, her becoming for the promise of potential. The feminine now knows. The greatest act of love is to hold the standard. The highest form of grace is to embody truth without compromise. She does not force, fix, or chase. She stands in her power, in her knowing, in her sacred fire. And whether the masculine meets her there, whether he chooses to rise, to heal, to lead himself, is his choice, not her burden. This is how the divine feminine leads the healing of the masculine, not by rescuing him, but by refusing to abandon herself. This is fierce grace, and it is non-negotiable. Beyond balance, the divine feminine as a force of liberation, not just harmony. The world has misunderstood the feminine. For too long, she has been reduced to the archetype of the peacemaker, the healer, the nurturer, the soft, the gentle, the balanced, the one who smooths the rough edges and holds the chaos in her arms until it quiets. But the divine feminine was never just here to bring harmony. She was never meant to be confined to the role of caretaker of balance. She is not just the salve, she is the storm. She is the fire that raises what no longer serves. She is the earthquake that shatters false foundations. She is the wild howl in the dead of night that awakens sleeping souls. The feminine is not here to simply mend broken systems. She is here to dismantle them. She is not here to soften dysfunction until it becomes tolerable. She is here to burn it down so something true can rise in its place. The divine feminine is a force of liberation, not just for herself, but for the collective, for the world. Her rising is not merely about balance. It is about truth. It is about unbinding herself from the cages of expectation. The expectation to be quiet, to be nice, to be patient, to be endlessly understanding. She is done being the balm that soothes broken systems without ever being allowed to rebuild them. She is done being reduced to softness when her nature includes ferocity. She is done being told that her fire is too much, that her truth is too loud, that her demands for freedom are too inconvenient. Balance is not the end goal. Liberation is. And sometimes liberation looks like chaos. It looks like walking away from dynamics that refuse to evolve. It looks like breaking generational contracts of silence, subservience, and suffering. It looks like choosing herself even when the world calls it selfish. It looks like destroying the illusions of who she was told to be, so she can finally become who she truly is. This is not a feminine that waits for permission. This is not a feminine that waters herself down to be digestible. This is not a feminine that is content to simply balance the masculine. She does not exist just to balance. She exists to liberate. And when she rises in her full spectrum, both the nurturing and the wild, the gentle and the ruthless, the healer and the destroyer, the world shifts. Because she no longer participates in the lie that says her purpose is to make everyone else comfortable. She doesn't rise to fit into the world. She rises to remake the world. This is the divine feminine unleashed, a force of reckoning, a force of remembering, a force of rebirth. And whether the world is ready or not, she rises.